everybody. How nice that not only did we have a little overcast morning and we have this sweet little spot of sunshine in the afternoon, but we get to be together again. And over COVID, it's been a long, long time. So welcome back for many of you who have been away for the winter and many extra bonus months, COVID months. We're excited to be back. At the community living room at Story and Song. This is kind of how we have always envisioned this space. I'm Donna Paz Kaufman, and with my husband, Mark Kaufman, we opened Story and Song right around Valentine's Day in 2018. So we're 3 years old and ticking and making it through COVID, thanks to all of our beautiful community who supported us throughout. So welcome. We are just delighted to have Dickie here with the new book. And so rather than just jump into the details about the first edition and this edition, Dickie, let's, for all of us, go back a little bit in time about where the town was on Amelia Island, because we have Old Town and then we have downtown, right? For those of us who have been here.
Newtown.
Yeah, Newtown. So tell us a little bit about that history, because the houses that we're going to talk about today and the churches that we're going to talk about today are really surrounding, Center Street, right? So tell us a little bit about that backstory about Old Town and the move.
She's my Oprah. I didn't have a white pantsuit, but whatever. It's a really fascinating story. Some of you had a chance to look at this print. This print is an old print that was done in the late 1800s, and it is what Fernandina looked like at that time. You can see the separation of Old Town and New Town. And what you see on the river is lots of boats, because things weren't transported by train and car or truck. They were transported all by water. And Fernandina has always had a very, very important port. There were 5 hotels on the island at that time, and people came from New York on steamships to visit the town and enjoy palm trees and warm air. But to answer your question, David Yulee, who you probably heard of and seen his statue down on Center Street, was, to say entrepreneur is a very small word for a very big man. He had a dream, and his dream was to build a network of railroads and ships, and the origin port would be Fernandina. First stop was to build the railroad across the state, and then he had plans literally to go up the Mississippi into Mexico. So he had grand plans, but a war got in the way, the Civil War. In his planning for his railroad, a lot of business and people came and lived here. The Florida House was built originally for the workers for the Florida Railroad. Well, he found that Fernandina, and I always call it Fernandina Beach was a marketing ploy in the 1950s. There is no beach in Fernandina. So the Old Town people were talked into moving to what is now the Fernandina that we know. And that picture clearly shows Old Town and a walkway that went from Old Town to what I call Newtown, and a lot of the papers call Newtown. So he literally recreated and platted it based on New York City. Our island is almost the same size as New York City, and we have first, second, and third, just like New York City. And we have a Central Park. So that was his plan. And how it impacted the houses, and I learned in doing the research for the second book, is he had an idea where everything would be, and he was very generous with the churches. So the reason our churches occupy such precious land is because of his generosity. So that was a very interesting thing I found when I began to look into the churches. Long answer.
No, it's a good answer. And so, like Lady Street, and some of the things that happened in Old Town. Was that part of the consideration? Is there anything at the History Museum that says what were the reasons why they moved the town?
Because there is actually a huge marsh between Old Town and New Town. Those of you that have been out there, it's very high ground. And it would have been construction-wise very complex. And he owned all the property downtown. So
that was good incentive.
Yes.
So we kind of think about Nassau County right now. A subdivision or a neighborhood goes up and they all go in, right? Is that what happened on 6th Street and some of those areas downtown that have these beautiful stately homes? Did they kind of all go up at once or in the same few decades?
They all were built within almost a 15-year period at the very, very late 1800s. A lot of entrepreneurialism, a lot of people came because of the railroad. And interestingly enough, a lot of the military, the soldiers that were here during the Civil War fell in love with the island like all of us have. So when they had a chance, they went home, gathered their families and their resources and came back here and started lives. It was a very vibrant community, and it began to attract people from the Northeast who thought palm trees and sand and warm air would be a good thing. And at that point, you have to remember in the history of Florida, there wasn't much beyond Jacksonville. I mean, Florida was Jacksonville, and Jacksonville was called Cowford because of the free-range cattle, which were part of the history. And so this was pretty hot stuff for people in the Northeast to come down and see a very different kind of tropical environment. So Mallory ship lines came down twice a week and delivered people to 5 hotels, including the Egmont, which took up an entire block just off Center South on 7th Street. That entire block was this huge hotel. So what happened? What happened is another entrepreneur named Henry Flagler also had a dream of railroad riches. And his idea, instead of going across the state, the first railroad was Yulee's Railroad. But Flagler had the dream of going down the entire state of Florida, which he did. And along the way, he built resort hotels. So any of you that have been to St. Augustine and seen the beautiful buildings there, that was all part of Flagler's dream. And we went to sleep. And in doing the research for the first book that I did, I read a very interesting fact. Why were we frozen in time? Why are these buildings still here? Why are they still in the same families in some cases? Well, it turns out there are 3 places that this historian pointed out that were frozen in time as well. One was Galveston, Texas, one was Mystic, Connecticut, and one was Fernandina Beach. And what did they have in common? What they had in common is everything stopped in their economy. In Mystic, Connecticut, it was the whaling ships and the oil that filled the lamps that lit the homes. When that stopped, the town stopped. Most towns evolved, they tear down houses, they build new houses, it just keeps going. But in a place like Mystic and our island in Galveston, houses wouldn't sell, nobody was buying houses, no one was restoring them. Restoring is not always a good thing. Some of the things done to old houses are very difficult to undo. So in Galveston, Texas, that was the original port in Texas, but it was very hurricane prone. So the wisdom of the shipping industry was, we're going to move our port. So Galveston also went to sleep, and they're beautiful Victorian homes in Galveston. And for us, it was progress moving down the state of Florida, people just discovering more. I was talking to someone earlier, and as a docent at the museum, we learn lots of stories. Some are probably true and some are probably not true, but they are good stories. And the story that that I have heard but never had it proven is that the town of Fernandina was offered a spur by Flagler's Railroad. And they said, we don't need you. We're doing just fine. We have 5 hotels. Ships are coming down. And so a spur was never built. So again, it's a story.
That's a good story, though. It might be the reason why we have this beautiful, quiet place, relatively quiet place, right?
It was.
It was, yeah. So what are some of the best stories that you've uncovered over the years with both editions of the books? Do you have some favorites?
Well, I think one thing that's fascinating about the history of this town is I see a lot of women here, and how strong the influence of women in this community. If you read the book, The Bailey House and Kate Bailey, that may be the most famous house story there is. Kate Bailey was a well-born lady, married a well-born man, and the Bailey House is what in that period they called a bride's house. It was expected that a well-heeled gentleman would gift his bride with a house. So the Bailey house was the house gifted to Kate, and she was told she could choose a big house with lots of furnishing or a small house, a big house furnished later, or a small house with all the furnishing. She got the big house and all the furnishing. Very talented woman. She wrote the fight song for the high school that they still use.
Wow.
And she was much younger than her husband, not unusual in that day and age. And she evidently would sit out on that beautiful porch and enjoy a beautiful day and watch the traffic go by. Well, one day, a group of workers came and started to take down that beautiful oak tree, Kate's oak. And she went out there and she said, "You're not going to do that." They were going to pave the street. And he said, "Well, ma'am, we were told to do it." Went back in her house and got her husband's shotgun and sat in a rocking chair. And it was the earliest version of the Tree Conservancy group.
Yes.
So that's one of the wonderful
A founding member.
Yes.
That is great. And what about the houses themselves? When you walk in places, I mean, there are lots of stories about them being haunted, but there's also tremendous beauty and craftsmanship. If you've ever been on the home tour, which is really a special treat, you go in and see the woodworking that people have done some pretty amazing things.
It's craftsmanship. I mean, it is talented in itself.
They don't make them like that anymore.
They don't make them anymore. This says, I may be going off a little bit, but I am so excited about this. We do have a holiday home tour coming up the first week in December. And we have an interesting home that's going to be open. It's one of those new townhouses near the city hall that was built specifically to mirror the rest of the historic district. The historic district preservation group is very careful about how everything looks. That whole Hampton Inn is a brand new building. It's not, people are amazed. And I said, that was an empty lot. And they built a hotel that mirrored the rest of the downtown. What I'm excited about is I met Ernie Saltmarsh Jr. the other day, and I'm doing an article for the Islander magazine in January, and he has created the Saltmarsh Hospitality Group, and they have bought historic homes, restored them, and they are now going to be offered as venues for parties and entertaining. They have recently bought the Lacine House, and that is the house on Center Street next to the post office. And I've seen the interior pictures, and they are furnishing it with antiques and fine art and all of that. And he bought the Florida house. I don't know if you remember, but there were yellow signs on the door and it was in bankruptcy, and he saved it and has made it into a thriving business. So he now has, the Florida house was the first one, the Beach Street Grill. a classic Amelia Island stop is the Down Under, and for some, the Green Turtle, and now the Lacine House. And he's very, very excited about the Lacine House and what they've done. And they are so meticulous about their restoration. Next time you're there and can stand and look, they found an old picture, and if you look, it's a double galleried house. And on the very bottom, there didn't used to be like a railing, and they found a picture, and now there's a railing with kind of that duplicates the house. So I am so thankful for them and what they've done, what they've contributed.
Because people can use their wealth in a variety of ways, right? And here they've so loved Fernandina Beach to buy those properties. The Beach Street Grill, we've all been watching that, right? It's been dormant for so long. What's kind of nice, Dickie, is to see this kind of investment, which broadens the attraction of downtown and Fernandina and Amelia Island in general to a higher quality, different class of tourism. It's not the college kids out for drinking, at spring break. We've really been able to attract the kinds of people who are interested in history, who care about old things, many of us,
I resent
old
that.
buildings, old buildings, and the fact that they have stories. So who do you want to read this book? And I will say that one of the fun things that we did during COVID, we had a conversation. You were in the store one day, we're talking about COVID and how do people cope through it. And we said, what a perfect thing to do outside. Grab a copy of the book and go on a home tour. Go on a self-guided home tour. So if you don't have one of these in the guest bedroom, you should have one of these in the guest bedroom when you could use about 4 hours and not have to do lunch that day. But this is just a perfect thing to enjoy the town. But
I have a friend over here, Karen, and she keeps buying books because she says, I've got a house guest this weekend.
yeah, so
and there is a map in the back. When we did the first book, I said, sometimes when you visit places that are historic, they'll have a little map and you can walk around, and this is house 3. So there is a map that you can drive or walk and then read the stories. And it's a fun thing to do.
So how many of the houses right now are owned by families that have owned those homes from the beginning? Or
well,
are there any?
The Lacine house was in the same family for 150 years. And that's the house that I'm talking about that's on Center Street. And if you know the Kavanaugh family on 6th.
Dog Star Tavern was Clinch's place.
Right.
But the family home was on 6th or 7th?
6th.
Okay.
And that house is still in the same family, and there are clocks and furniture and all of that. So it's not so much they're in the same family, but they have not turned that many times. So often when you move into a new house, I'm guilty of that. You want to make it your house and you make changes. And sometimes those changes compromise the historical integrity of the house. But a lot of the houses that I've written about through the years, the people that buy them want to undo the bad and get back, find the craftsman and recreate the charm of the original house.
Is there a house you would live in if you could?
Ooh, that's tough. I'm old enough that I don't want a big house. And it has to be 1 floor, so that limits it.
It does. It does.
I can't choose a child.
Okay, we won't force you into that. So let's talk about preservation before going into the church side of the book. As you say, there are lots of towns that don't have codes and oversight groups, so changes get made and history has changed forever, right? And we had at least one disaster that I'm aware of, that some construction was happening on a home and it couldn't be repaired. Some accident happened, and so the home got rebuilt to its perfect prior self. But talk some about the whole aspect of preservation and renovation of these precious homes. How does that work here?
Well, I want to make it clear that the controls are only the exterior of the house. And they're very strict in terms of the materials that are used. And if a house, I think 2 of the houses on the historic tour this year are new houses that were built, but they fit in, and their style and all of that. One thing that's kind of fun isn't the right word, but interesting about the architecture in our town is it's very eclectic. These houses were not designed by architects. They were designed by the owners. Many of the builders were shipbuilders. So I keep using the word craftsman. These people knew how to use materials, and they were wonderfully creative. It is, when you see a sign that a house is on the National Register, that does not protect the house. It only recognizes the house as being historically significant. So it is up to some government body to take the steps to protect it. So we have a preservation board. It's a committee appointed by the city commission, and they are the ones that look at the plans and all of that and say yay or nay, or give direction to the homeowners. Anybody here had an experience with historic preservation in our town? That may be good or bad.
Could be. Okay, so let's talk about the churches. They're new. They weren't in the previous edition. So talk a little bit about how you decided to do that and what you learned researching and visiting some of the historic churches.
Well, I'm going to brag on Donna a little bit. Donna and I have known each other for a long time, even before Story and Song, and I so respect her knowledge about the book business. And I have our first book we printed, and in the book business, the more books you print, the lower the cost per book. So you have to figure out the puzzle of how many books and all of that. So now we have self-publishing that has reached now a quality level that I think is wonderful. So I said, Donna, I'm going to redo the book, and I think I'm going to add churches, and will you help me self-publish? So Donna has coordinated this with me, and I'm just thrilled with the result. And it's gone very well. So if I was going to redo the book, I thought, why not enhance it in some way? And the historic churches in our community are part of the history and the fabric of the community. It's a mix of Black churches and white churches. And I found it very hard to find information about the churches. I did history at our museum, but in a house, as Donna said, when you may have the same family in it, they know the history of the house. Churches evolve, and why certain things happen in the church kind of gets lost in time. Where is Zen?
She's over here.
Okay, Zen, stand up.
Zen Waters.
So, the church with the longest name, on the island is the Macedonia African Methodist Episcopal Church.
The historic.
Historic.
We got to start all over. Start from the beginning.
And that church is going to celebrate its 150th birthday next year. So if I hadn't done this in this book, I would never know about Zen, but I was connected by Joanne Leinberg, a friend, and about this incredible church. So now I'm learning more, and I'm going to help other people learn more about your church and all of that. They're going to be going through a renovation, so there's going to be grant money and community support. Many years ago, Trinity Church, Methodist Church, ran into some tough times, and by golly, the committee rallied, raised the money, got the grants, and put the bricks back together again. So anyway, so this made a connection for me, and it's fascinating. I look forward to learning more and more.
And we're uncovering more and more. And it's a fascinating history. And you're talking about the shipbuilders, our beams on our interior roof is just amazing, and because it came from the shipbuilders. And it's just a little tiny church that she's mighty.
Yeah.
Thank you, Zan, for coming.
Yeah, we look
I'm
forward to the
excited to be
project. The thing about this island, right, Dickie, is that there are needs, and when they're articulated and people understand them, the community rallies. Look at the number of projects that we've been able to be behind without needing government to do it, right?
Yep.
All of us just get it done. So I'm curious about First Baptist Church downtown. Can we talk about that one first, or second after AME, the old First Baptist Church? Tell us about what's going on. It's been,
Well, that was kind of a trick to handle because many of us remembered the old First Baptist Church, which was there for a long, long time, a very big, very active church. And then they built their house on 8th Street and their church. And so now it's kind of evolved into two different things. There is an active church there, and the Sunday school rooms have been turned into high-end condominiums. And we expected to have one of those condominiums on the home tour, but construction delays. So I'm hoping that they will jump in next year.
next year. It'll be something to see,
It will be.
because that's a whole new vision.
Yeah.
So what do you see in terms of the energy and the creativity now? As time has gone by, we have this beautiful set of buildings, both residential and houses of worship, and they're getting repurposed. What's your sense of what's happening?
Well, and that's, as I
what's
mentioned, the
next?
Saltmarsh Hospitality Group. They have, it's very expensive to renovate a house and maintain a house, an old house. It's even in our modern houses, there's always something. The toilet breaks, or the sink backs up, or whatever. So I think we love that people that love history and will buy these houses and take care of them. And what's interesting, another thing that happened in our town frozen in time, is what you call a shotgun house. Those are all being beautifully, I mean, if you go off Center Street now, the further out you go, there's more and more being done. And does everyone know what a shotgun house is? It is, they were built, and it's usually, again, I told you that the typical town, those would have been torn down in any other town. If this town had grown at a pace, at a normal pace, those would have all been gone, and there would have been newer, uglier houses. But those little shotguns maintained, they were built for the railroad workers back in the David Yulee days. And the shotgun house has a door in the middle, and then a room here, a hall, and you could shoot a shotgun down the hall. So, but it's rare that you see in a historic area the low income or worker bee. What changed the economy here was the paper mills came in, and that brought a lot of the housing that you see on Atlantic and all of that was part of the coming of the paper mills. And then we had the coming of the plantation and the Ritz-Carlton, and that all infused the economy.
Sure did. So what would you like us to get out of the book as readers and book buyers and neighbors and people who appreciate and love Amelia Island? What do you hope we get out of it?
I think, I mean, it's hard to shut me up, as you know, when I talk about the historic district. When I first moved here 20 years ago, I didn't know a soul, and one of my first commitments, and I do make commitments, was at the History Museum, and I can't say enough about our museum and what they contribute to our community and the resources that are there. So I marched down there and said, I want to take the docent training. And I just was mesmerized by the history and just fell in love with the history and the houses. And I have been involved ever since. And I think the more you learn, the more fascinated you are. And it's like when people come to town, when Karen has guests or whatever, when you know something about the houses and you look at this beautiful street and you say, that's the Bailey house, or that's this house, or the Fairbanks house. So So it just, they're like my children.
Yeah. Oh, I bet. Who's got a question? Yes, Joanne.
Dickie, one of the things that I've always been curious about in Old Town, the bluff there is very high. And I understand that in terms of height, it was safer from hurricanes and wind and water and all that. But how did they manage the docks? And that was the place where before Newtown, the ships landed. How did they get from the ships, down this bluff, which is really pretty steep? How did that work? Do you know?
They were very elevated docks. I mean, remember, if you look at this picture, these were huge. I mean, even going back to the Spanish. So they have actually found the remnants of wooden piers that were built there.
And they were, ladders from
Well,
the
it would have
docks
gone
to
out from the bluff, and, we have docks now that go up and down and all of that. So, it would have been a highly elevated dock.
And then from the schooner to the dock, would it just been handed up or a ladder or?
Well, I think you'd watch the tides.
So we don't have that big a tide here, but okay. Okay, thank you.
How did Fernandina get two paper factories? Is it because of the railroad or this little tiny island to have two paper factories on it is interesting?
Well, first of all, they're not paper factories. I'm not correcting you, but they make very different products. And even back in the Container Corporation days, in the early days, they make very, very different products.
You mean back when they started?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. And the town very aggressively went after the paper companies.
They did.
But they make, when I do my tours, they actually make cellulose, which is sawdust. You see these huge mountains, and that is used in things you don't want to know about, like ice cream and toothpaste and cheese. So it's the cellulose, and they also make craft paper, that brown paper. And if you ever go down near the docks, you'll see these huge rolls of brown craft paper. So they kind of saved the economy, and they built their new houses. They didn't want the old houses, so they left the historic district alone. They did.
That was a real shift in our economy. When you think about the ships coming, and then all of a sudden industry took its way, and now we have a lot of tourism. It's a significant.
And a lot of log trucks.
A lot of log trucks. Yeah, Sherry Carter, yes.
I didn't see you, Sherry.
I'm back here taking pictures of you. I'm referring to the question about the docks up at Old Town. There's a big plaque up there that talks about the slave ships that were brought into that port. And when you're talking about the ships then and the ships now, the ships then were huge. They were very, very tall. They stacked and carried a lot of things. So right there, when you put a ship that size in the water, you're going to be up as high as that bluff just about. The last old ship that came into the docks in Fernandina, if you stood on the dock and you looked up at that ship, the rails were way up there. So that's where the difference is in what you're
The
at.
heights. Okay, thank you.
And there's a plaque there that's interesting about the slaves that were on there. Right there at that point.
What, Joanne, what is it called? There's a series of points going up the East Coast, and it has a name.
The Middle Passage.
Pardon?
The Middle Passage.
That's right, the Middle Passage, and I didn't know about that till they put the plaque up.
Right.
And Sherry's telling me that if you go out on that green, the plaque is to the right of the cannon and all of that. And Sherry's hiding back there, but I asked her to come because she collaborated on this book when the photographer in my original book, Jan Johansson, I don't know if any of you knew him, just a wonderful man, very talented photographer, taking pictures of houses or churches. It's not easy. My friend Steve Leinberg said, I don't do that. And so when we started working on the book, Sherry and I worked together, and she kept showing me pictures, and I go, "Meh." But we worked through it, and Tom worked with Sherry. So the pictures of the churches in the book are because Sherry's a talented photographer.
So, I mean, can we talk about that a little bit before we go to sign books? Do you know much about the African American arrival? There are a variety of stories here, and maybe somebody in the audience knows something about this as well. But Old Town had a warehouse where where enslaved people were examined medically before shipped to St. Mary's.
They got off the
Shared.
ship there, and if they were sick,
Yeah,
they were taken to another area and left to die.
here.
Yeah.
To Tiger Island.
Yeah, they would take them to Tiger, and they would also, if they were very, very sick and just like, just like out of it, instead of loading up the boat with an almost dead human being, they would take them to another area and they would die, and then they would bury. If they may have buried them, sometimes they didn't. Sometimes, as they were coming into port, if they were very sick, they would just throw them overboard. So there are human bones out there just as much as there are sharks.
And before before Florida was a state, slaves were brought into Florida, and this was a very convenient way they could take them up and offload them in Georgia.
So was there any trading of enslaved people here? Here.
Yeah, most of the time they would take them up to South Carolina. Because this port here wasn't patrolled like the ones up there. So after, the skirmishes about slaves being brought in and they were told they couldn't, Florida was the only area that allowed it still. You could get away with it.
Yep.
Because of all the piracy.
Yep.
So they'd slip into here and then they'd get the slaves off the boat, and then they'd take them up. And sometimes they did have a trade here.
Dickie, is there any information about homes owned by enslaved people? Are any of
one
them still
interesting
available?
house that is in this book was Chloe Merrick was quite an amazing woman, and she did a great deal to help post-Civil War get women educated and all of that. Very, very, very interesting woman. And her house has been restored. I don't know the people, but I'm glad. It's an interesting house. It's down near the Steamboat House. It's kind of catty corner to the Steamboat House. And the Florida, of course, you pushed a button. The Florida House, not the Florida House, the Williams House is said to have been a stop on the Underground Railroad. And if you tour that house, it's an absolutely beautiful house. It was a pre-Civil War house, and then it was enhanced by an architect with the galleries and all the fussy stuff. But in the dining room, there is a false door or wall where they said that slaves were hidden. And I've heard this before, but someone said the signals that it was a safe place, so they would put a quilt or a blanket and put it a certain way, and that would be a signal or a message.
Do you know where Harriet Tubman slept when she was on Amelia Island? Is there any information about where? No? That would be interesting.
It's on, I guess it would be on the other side of Beach on 9, right there. Those, one of those bed and breakfasts, the one on the right. I just, name flew out of my head.
It's not the Williams
It could be.
house? Yeah.
I can take you there.
Yeah, explain. Okay, so is there any more information kind of along that line of history that we don't know much about? Like, have there been some famous people who have actually owned or slept in some of these historic?
There is. The Florida House is fascinating because it's had so many lives. It's supposed to be the oldest continually operating inn in Florida. And the most fascinating piece of history is Jose Marti. There was quite an interest in Cuban revolutionary politics, and there were guns here and all kinds of intrigue. Villa Las Palmas, Boardman was very involved in that. So he slept there. They say Mary Pickford slept there. And there, another thing, you go, when you do this research, you go down these little trails. Jacksonville was quite a movie production place for a while. I mean, I think they liked the Florida and the light and all of that. So it was quite a popular place for them to produce movies at one time. And I guess then they moved west. But probably the most famous was Ulysses S. Grant. And he stayed there, and I guess the descriptions of the parades and all of the fuss when he was here was quite amazing. And I'm trying to think if I thought of it, Mary Pickford. Trying to think who else. But anyway, yes, there have been famous people.
We do parades quite well.
Yes.
We do them frequently. I heard before I moved here that we got a new fire truck and we had a parade. So, such a charming town. There's much more to learn in Dickie's book. Do get a copy or two, or come back to Story and Song whenever you need them for the new neighbor that's moved in down the street. And there's a special offer today. I love these little books. There are a series of these articles from the porch that Dickie has written over many years. How long have you been writing for the paper?
20 years.
20 years, almost as long as you've been here. These are charming. And what's really great for guests is just to pick something up and just read a little bit. And so these are just nice little snippets, quaint, very, very Fernandina. So when you purchase a copy of the new book, Dickie is offering a complimentary copy of one of the porch books. So anything you want to add? Anything you want to ask before we?
I want to know, what's the oldest house?
The Williams house is one of the oldest, was pre-Civil War. Most of them are post-Civil War. So I would say, and that's my guess, it would be the Williams house.
What year was it built?
Look in the book.
Wonderful. Okay, well, Dickie Anderson, you are a big booster. Thank you all for coming. If Amelia Island has one of the, an opportunity to promote itself, Dickie has always found the cute, quaint, charming stories and shared them with all of us in the paper. You support so many organizations that do good work, that many of you are board members and volunteers of. Thank you for getting word out and making this community even better. You're a real gem. Dickie will be at the table here signing copies. You can go ahead and grab them here and pay for them on your way out. Thanks for joining us today. Happy Thanksgiving if we don't see you before.